is nothing to shout about.
But still, you're not trying to shut the chemical industry or the aviation industry down, are you?
No, we're not.
The record shows that some of these industries, coal for example, are environmentally unfriendly. Burning coal generates air pollution, acid rain, greenhouse gases, and cancer-causing chemicals, but little protest or fear. If you think the difference is radiation, think again. Since coal contains radium, a coal plant actually emits much more radioactivity than a nuclear plant. A nuclear plant's cooling towers emit only steam, water vapor.
The health effects of coal burning are thousands of times worse than the health effects of nuclear power, according to anybody's analysis, not my analysis necessarily, but they never report it. I've never seen that in print.
Scientists like Cohen, who rank risks according to cold statistical danger, seem to come up with a completely different picture than the public, which assesses risks more personally. What Cohen is doing is called risk analysis, determining statistically how dangerous various technologies actually are. What ordinary people engage in is risk perception, intuitively deciding how dangerous technologies seem. Where do our perceptions come from? Why do we perceive this technology to be dangerous rather than safe?
What was the source of the knowledge that you have, the ideas that you've had, the impressions that you've gotten of nuclear waste and nuclear power?
I think the very little that I know I probably heard on the news.
Okay.
I don't know very much.
I've heard stuff on the news and read it in the paper and watched TV programs based on what could happen, in Hollywood.
Television news, newspaper, public television.
Scientists like Hank Jenkins Smith have done extensive studies of the ways ordinary people think about nuclear power.
Most of what we know as a population about nuclear power and nuclear stuff in general is an amalgam of images of nuclear war. In some cases, the potential benefits, the technologies that can be harnessed, the energy that can be produced, but mostly images that are quite negative. Think about popular culture, which is one of the great deliverers of information about most concepts right now.
Problem in Sector 7G.
7G. These bits and pieces of popular mythology feed the way that people understand facts about these things.
Noise.
Most times, if you ask people, they'll say they really don't know a whole lot, but they still have a point of reference, and that is all these sort of vague linkages to awful events.
Huh? It's my problem! We're doomed!
Sector 7G is now being isolated.
It's got enormous implications. It creates this dread association, fear that the worst can happen.
Researchers say ordinary people use rules of thumb to measure risk. People tend to find technologies like nuclear power especially scary because of qualities that have nothing to do with how dangerous they are. There's the dread factor, the fear of a catastrophic disaster. Second, say scientists like psychiatrist Robert DuPont, an expert in fears and phobias, there's the issue of who's in control.
If you feel like you're in charge, you have the feeling that you can stop the risk, you can help yourself. It's the difference between driving a car and being a passenger in an airplane. When you're driving a car, you perceive your ability to stop or swerve or stay out of a situation. Whereas when you're the passenger in 14C, then you've got to depend on the air traffic control system and the mechanics at American Airlines and the pilot and everybody else who is going to keep you up there. So you get more afraid. Now, of course, the paradox here is that in the modern world, when someone else is controlling the risk, we're actually safer than when we control the risk. Because when someone else is controlling the risk, there are social institutions in place to reduce the risk. To fly an airplane, you actually have to have training. To drive an automobile, you don't. So that you're actually much safer when somebody else is controlling the risk. But the perception, the psychology is the opposite. So what happens with nuclear power, it's them. It's not me. It's somebody doing it to me that makes it unacceptable.
DuPont, who was attacked in the 1980s by anti-nuclear groups for expressing these views, identifies two other important reasons we fear nuclear power. It's unfamiliar. Remote, exotic technologies are much scarier than technologies we encounter every day. Finally, there's need. Since most Americans know that the U.S. has ample supplies of coal and natural gas, they have little incentive to confront their nuclear fears. With air travel, which can't easily be replaced, people make great efforts to overcome their anxieties.
On all four counts, nuclear power generates fear. It's a cataclysmic accident that people are concerned about. It's controlled by them, the utilities or the government or the scientists or whoever it is that is perceived as being the bad guys. It's unfamiliar to most people, and most people feel they don't really need nuclear power, that they can get their power from coal or oil or windmills or some other basis. They don't really need the nuclear power.
What's true for Americans is also true for Italians, Germans, and Swedes. But it's not true everywhere. There are countries where nuclear power is accepted, even popular. Parts of Asia, and especially in France. France runs on nuclear power. 75% of French electricity is nuclear generated. I visited the village of Civaux in southwestern France, the site of France's latest and most modern nuclear plant, to find out what local people like Madame Schumacher thought of nuclear energy.
Et là, ce sont des ifs. Les boules sont poison violent.
I asked her if she was afraid.
Non, moi je n'ai pas peur du nucléaire. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup moins de risques que quand je prends ma voiture le matin, ou pour ceux qui habitent en dessous d'un barrage, ou ceux qui sont qui travaillent, je ne sais pas, dans des choses très dangereuses en fait.
This is René Bark, the village school teacher. Is he afraid that the nuclear reactors half a mile away will put his students in danger?
Non, je n'ai pas peur parce que j'ai visité plusieurs fois au cours du chantier et les explications que j'ai eues, les maquettes, les films projetés m'ont montré qu'il s'agissait d'une technique qui était très, surtout au niveau de la sécurité, qui était très poussée, donc je n'ai pas peur.
Everyone we spoke to in the village seemed unconcerned. From the baker.
Ça me fait pas peur. Non.
To the village hairdresser.
Non, pas du tout. Moi, le nucléaire, j'en ai pas peur du tout. Elle était là avant que j'arrive, donc si je suis venue ici, c'est que j'en avais pas peur du tout.
Since the technology is the same, why are the attitudes so different?
They're not well informed at all. They can't get the information from their government. There's the administrative state that's very, very secretive, and the industry and the government are almost indistinguishable, number one. Number two, they have no right to go to court to open it up. The courts don't have the influence in France against administrative agencies the way our courts do. They don't have a tort law system the way we do. They don't have a freedom of information law the way we do. When it comes to nuclear power, they might as well be a totalitarian society. They're as closed on nuclear power as any Soviet Union was.
But are the French really so brainwashed? Or is there another explanation? Certainly since the early 70s, there's been little public opposition to nuclear power. To the contrary.
3 years ago, we thought possibly it would be necessary to have a new unit. There was a fight between several sides, not to avoid the plant, but to have it. And there were a lot of members of parliament who came to see the minister, and I want the plant. French people like big industrial projects, and nuclear plants are one of the most often visited plants in France. During summer, it's a place where you go in family and you see.
On a également ce bâtiment ici entièrement fermé, c'est ce que l'on appelle le bâtiment de sécurité.
More than 6 million French people have taken tours, like the one I took of Civaux, which explained in exhaustive detail how everything worked.
Alors on va continuer à faire le tour et puis on va aller voir donc dans le bâtiment réacteur. Donc c'est par en bas.
Unlike Nader, I thought the French knew much more about nuclear power than Americans, not less. But I noticed a more striking difference. Unlike Americans, the French seemed to trust their experts.
For a long time in the families, the good thing for a child was not to become a lawyer, it was to become an engineer or a scientist. French people like their engineers and their scientists, and they are confident, they rely on them.
While French citizens have no more control over nuclear power than Americans, polls show they trust the people who do. That's an important difference. But more important even than familiarity and trust, it seems to me, is the fourth attribute, need. The French have few energy resources. After the 1973 oil crisis, they concluded that their future as a modern nation depended on nuclear energy.
In France, we have no oil, no gas, no coal, no choice. And for the French people, it was very positive to develop a national energy with nuclear energy. And when we built this plant, we explained much. We developed many presentations.
Brancher son grille-pain nucléaire.
Vous voulez dire électrique?
Nucléaire.
Électrique?
Nucléaire.
To explain to French that it was very important for France.
If fear is less in France, so is cost. France's centralized political system allows standardization and control unimaginable in the US. The French selected just one American reactor model and charged one agency, EDF, to run the system for the nation. But America's decentralized system meant that from the start, it was a messy and expensive free-for-all. Many different designs, managed by many different utilities. Ironically, in American hands, the energy that some dreamed would be too cheap to meter has ended up one of the most expensive ways to generate electric power.
And what we have coming in this country is more competition in the electricity market. And a lot of these nuclear reactors cannot compete. Some of the existing ones will be able to compete and keep running for a while, but they'll retire. Some of them will not be able to compete and will shut down well before the end of their projected lifespans. And building a new reactor is just a complete fantasy in this country.
What do you say about a technology that wants to persist on the public dole because it can't meet a market test? I don't know anybody in Wall Street, and I don't know anybody in the electric utility industry who wants to build any more nuclear plants.
Nuclear physicists like Charles Till argue that's short-term thinking.
The exciting thing about nuclear power is its ability to handle mankind's needs in the future. It's not whether today, in the 20% of electricity that it produces in this nation, whether it can produce it for 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour or 4 cents a kilowatt hour, where, you know, coal is 3.5 cents or whatever. That isn't the argument at all.
Fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, says